All right, Steve, would you like to go first?
I'd love to, thank you. So good afternoon, everyone, and I'm super excited to be here. My name is Steve Nimmo. I'm a co-founder of a nonprofit by the name of CAREGIVERS Foundation. We're kind of in place in the Bay Area to help spread awareness about mental health, help sort of reduce the stigma and provide resources where we can to help direct people to find the help that they can find. We were, and this topic is super important to me. Our foundation is inspired by my son, Zachary, who we lost 2 years ago to his battle with mental health. And, we clearly don't want to see any other families go through the pain that we've had to endure. And, quite honestly, we've had the pleasure of meeting with some of the youth in the Bay Area, and we're so inspired by their stories and everything. And from a CAREGIVERS perspective, we're here to help. So we've got a series of programs that are available and some recordings. I'm sitting in our little home studio where my daughter records a series called Sit Down with Sam, where she interviews people and talks about their mental health challenges and really talks about hope and how they can overcome and how they've kind of battled through and as she says, kind of comes out the other side as stronger than before. Some really inspiring things, all available on our website. So I'm thrilled to be here.
Thank you, Steve. And I dropped a link to the CAREGIVERS Foundation in the chat for people who want to visit their website and learn more about the great work they're doing. Morgan?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm also excited to be here. My name is Morgan Byler. I'm a clinical social worker. And so what I do right now is I work with STARS Community Services, which is based in San Leandro. My office is based in San Leandro, but we're all throughout the state of California. Our services are in the East Bay, so Hayward, San Lorenzo, Oakland. We have our programs up and down the East Bay. I work in the school-based program. So that means that I'm contracted to be a therapist at a school. And I currently work at a middle school. And so what I do is I provide therapeutic services to students who have Medi-Cal. That's individual, group, family. We do connection to community supports if they need it. We do crisis. So I assess for risk, help manage crisis, safety planning. And then if they don't qualify for our services, linking them to a provider. And so that's what I do for my professional hat. But at the same time, I'm also a parent myself. So I have a middle schooler and I have an elementary student so I'm the whole distance learning thing, completely understand that. I'm having to do the whole distance learning, the social emotional support for my children and also for my children at my school. So I have both of those hats. So I completely understand, like, this is definitely a trying time and it is very difficult. And so I'm hoping this will be helpful for everybody.
Great, thank you so much. And I am going to check in and see if Renee has been able to join us. I don't see him on the Zoom, but he might have signed in under a different name. We're going to give him one moment, and if not, we'll go ahead and get started. Renee is a therapist on the parent stress line, and one of the things we know in this work is sometimes things come up, and our clients always come first, and we want to make sure we're able to be there for them. So we'll welcome Renee when he's able to join us, and we'll go ahead and get started right now. Steve, we're going to go ahead and get started with you. What are some warning signs that a young person might be experiencing a mental health challenge?
Yeah, and this is a question we get asked a lot. So we've had a chance to do a lot of research around it, and I can also speak in terms of what we saw in our son when Zachary started to experience his mental health challenges and very classic symptoms, which is why we reached out for help and had him seeing professional help. And but a lot of the things that we saw in him was, the first thing was isolation. Beginning to isolate himself, and not just isolating himself away from his parents, which could be typical for a teen to want to spend more time with their friends, but isolating from everyone. More time in room alone, that type of thing. And the other big thing that we noticed in him particularly was loss of interest in things that he was passionate about. without replacing them with something else. So he was, for instance, he was a premier lacrosse player. He played on an elite team, and all of a sudden he just no longer wanted to play lacrosse. No longer was interested in sports. So these types of things were very classic. And we've had a chance. My wife and I are both certified trainers for mental health first aid, and also had a chance to talk to some of our advisors around, what are some of those classic symptoms to kind of add to the list that we can share. And I'll just share a bit of a short list here with a bullet at the end of how to kind of put it all together. But some of them were increased tension in the youth. And a lot of these we noticed in Zachary, right? Becoming easily frustrated, that type of thing. Changing in sleep patterns was one, and that could be either getting too much sleep or too little sleep. It could go one way or the other. There's also a list of physical sensations, complaints of headaches, stomach aches, tingling in extremities, that type of thing. I talked about isolation and that. And I think the one point that I'll add to the end of this list is, sort of looking at, are these items kind of persistent and excessive? And those are kind of the words, because a lot of these could get mixed up in typical adolescent behavior, but it's that persistent and excessive level, which may trigger a fact that, we may be seeing signs of a mental health challenge.
Yeah, I really appreciate you naming the persistentness of it, and really being really aware of how it's impacting the young person's functioning.
Yeah.
Morgan, what are some factors that you're finding are contributing to young people experiencing suicidal thoughts right now, or in general?
Okay. Well, I will let you know that once COVID happened and we started sheltering in place, I saw a lot of regression in my youth. I saw more suicidal thinking, more self-harming, more higher risk behaviors happening. And it actually kind of makes sense if you think about it. If someone's already thinking about like the world's kind of a bad place or things are really bad, and then all of a sudden there's this global pandemic and the world feels chaotic and crazy and like it's overwhelming, that just kind of reinforces that idea that the world's a bad place when stuff like that's happening. I would imagine for adults, you felt super overwhelmed and trying to figure out what's going on. Well, imagine a young person. And a lot of times with young people, their brains are more here and now. They're more in the moment, and they have a lot of trouble with future thinking. Future thinking is an adult thing. That idea of being able to feel like there's the future, this isn't permanent, things can change. That's more of an adult thing. That's just our brain. That's how it is. So a lot of times children, when they're thinking like the world's really, there's a lot going on, it feels like a horrible place, they feel like this is going to be forever. It's hard for them to feel like that it's going to change. And like a lot of times when you're seeing stuff in the news, it's getting reinforced that way. Definitely. And then like what Steve was talking about is that isolation piece. With COVID, a big part of it was we needed to social distance. We needed to start working from home. We needed to start doing school from home. We needed to shelter in place. And it's a breeding ground for isolation. Our children get a lot of social connection at school. Just simple organic stuff that happens in the classroom that you don't even think about doesn't happen when we do it virtually. Right? And then they have those free periods where they're having lunch together, or they're hanging out after school or before school, or even in that like 4 or 5 minute passing period, there's a lot of social connection that's not happening anymore. And then we think about our children not going over to their friends' houses. They're not going outside and playing. So they're not connecting like at all to people. I hear that a lot from my children. I'm like checking in about, hey, are you connected? And they're like, no. I'm not allowed to go to my friend's house. I'm not allowed to go outside. My parents are really afraid, understandably so, of me going to places. And then I check in, and the main way people are connecting are virtually, like through apps and through video games. But parents are really concerned about that. They're concerned about their children going on TikTok or going on Snapchat, understandably so. And they're worried about kids playing video games all day, which makes sense. We don't want kids on the screens all the time. But that's about the only way they're connecting right now. And so a lot of times that's getting limited. And so we have not connecting whatsoever. And so kids are feeling a lot more isolated right now. Definitely. And social connection is an extremely important piece of mental health. Every single one of my clients on their treatment plan, it says we're going to have a social support network. So it's vital. And right now, just the way the world is working, it's making that so much harder to happen.
Yeah, thank you for naming some of those patterns, and especially how they're playing out during COVID. And when I think about our children, I also think about some of the younger ones who aren't really that used to connecting even on the screens, and the additional layer of isolation that comes with that. I have a young kid myself who doesn't have a device yet, and her way of relating to other children is really mainly through play, and we really see that the distance, the physical distancing, take a toll on her as she's unable to use that language of play and togetherness to connect with her peers. So I appreciate you naming that. Steve, what are some barriers that might keep young people or families from speaking up in situations like this?
Yeah, and another great question, and I'll tell a quick little story of right before all the shelter in place started, we held an event in Livermore where we had some breakout sessions where the kids went out. We had a high school room and a middle school room, and they met with sort of youth leaders, and had great conversations. And one of the questions was just this, was around what is kind of stopping you from moving forward with talking about mental health, because we had a lot of conversations. They're like, oh, if I sprain my ankle, I run to the doctor quickly, but if I have if my issue is above my neck, I kind of suffer in silence. And why is that? Great conversation, and without batting an eye across the board, stigma, right? So in the event, and this is right from the kids, they hashtagged stigma stupid. Right. So, which, I kind of liked it, right? It's like, let's shed this barrier from ourselves, that it is okay to reach out and see a professional or talk to someone, because that's sort of our big mantra is, let's talk about this, right? So it's get out there and have a conversation, and that's healthy. So, shedding ourselves of the stigma. And then, we got a little bit deeper of, what's driving the stigma, right? So what is getting into it? And they're, and this is why I say that the youth are so insightful and they inspire me, because they're, they hit it just right perfectly on the head as far as what's driving these barriers. They talked about the fear of getting in trouble. Right. So some examples that came out in that is like, oh, if I'm on a sports team and I let people know that I'm suffering from a mental health challenge, am I going to lose playing time? Am I going to not get on the field, or am I going to get sent home? That type of thing, or being punished, sort of beyond just getting in trouble, being punished. I mean, it even came up all the way to, what if I get thrown in jail for it? Right. Because these are the things that are, this is from the youth. Of what's going through their minds. There's also a fear of letting their parents down. And this is why I think it's important that as parents, we sort of model behavior, that it's okay to have these powerful conversations. And while whether it's true or not, this feeling of this fear of letting others down is kind of driving them. And then I think there's a few others that are real. And these more came from the parent side of the equation when we had this conversation, but it was things like cost, right? So, can I even afford to get help? Is that available to me? Will my insurance cover this? These types of fears of, or even logistics. For us, when we needed, when Zachary started seeing professional help, logistically finding the help and then getting to it, we drove every day down to Fremont. Because that's the closest provider we could find at the time. I wish I knew then what I know now, because I have a lot more connections in place of where I can turn to, but we were kind of stumbling our way through it. So logistically, but to me, it all goes back to that first one, right? Stigma. right? And we've, you know, and I think as adults, we can help model the behavior that it is okay to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much for touching on such important topics such as stigma and then the guilt and shame, as well as issues of access. These are all, I think, major barriers for young people and their families when we think about why can't people just go get help. You know, I think we're so often quick to suggest that somebody just needs to talk to someone, but not really acknowledging all the barriers that somebody might be experiencing in getting to that point. Before I go to the next question, I see that our panelist Renee has been able to join us. Hi, Renee, welcome.
Oh my God. I am so sorry, Naj. I thought I had it in my calendar to be at 1 o'clock, and it's crazy.
You know,
but here I am.
We are flexible and we are going with the flow. We'll take a moment to let you introduce yourself. And the question that we skipped over to allow for you to be able to join us was really, how do parents and caregivers know when to ask for professional help? So please take a couple minutes, tell us who you are and what you do, and you can start with that question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So my name is Renee DeValerie. I'm a psychotherapist and MFT. I have my private practice here in Oakland, and I have been working for Family Paths for the past, 14 years, you know, in the different capacities. The last capacity, I was a manager of the parent support helpline at Family Paths, and recently I have left the position. I have focused more on my private practice, but I continue working for Family Paths as a consultant. You can put it that way. Yes.
Thank you. And I put a link to the Family Paths website in the chat for anyone who would like to access that. And we'll have you start with, how do parents and caregivers know when to ask for professional help, Renee, in your opinion?
Okay, so I think that parents need to be aware of the signs. They, you know, the easy answer is that one. We can just be aware of the signs. What has changed with the kids? Do you have social kids that all of a sudden they're not socializing? Do you have kids who do well in school and all of a sudden they're not doing well at all? Just any changes in behaviors that are radical, they should not just be swept under the rug and said, oh, you know what, it's just going to pass. But it's more of those things that is like, let's pay attention. Let's just really pay attention. And if it comes to the point that those changes endure, that they last for a long time, then that may be time to definitely seek some support or at least some consultation from somebody and say, is there something I need to worry about over here? But something else that I was actually thinking about this not too long ago is you got to also pay attention. Parents need to pay attention to their gut instincts, okay? When things are happening with kids, parents are going to feel that there is just something different that it's happening, or something is up going on with my son or with my daughter. And that may be the time to go ahead and talk to them about it. That may be the time to just kind of have the curiosity spark go off, and either do a little bit of research, talk to somebody about it, and so on and so forth. And if I may just throw one other thing, I also want to suggest to not just look at behavioral changes as whims of kids. Behavioral changes, they do mean things all the time, especially when we're talking about the little ones, okay, who don't have the vocabulary or the ability to express what they're thinking or they're feeling. They're just going to demonstrate it. They're just going to show it by the way that they play, by the way that they interact with others, by the way that they are with themselves. So that's something to pay attention to. But the same thing with teenagers. I mean, teenagers, yes, they have a better ability to speak and to express themselves, but they're teenagers, okay? So we know how that goes. We were all there at one point. And they may not be the most expressive or the ones most able to seek support. So it falls upon the parents to speak for them, and to do for them.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really glad you brought up the younger kids, because that's something that's a area that I'm really passionate about, is not thinking about suicide prevention as or thinking about young people and their mental health as something that starts once we have a teenager in the house, but really thinking about these conversations as kind of lifelong conversations in our homes. They just kind of evolve and look different as our kids get older. So thank you for bringing up play as the way that we might notice something is not going well with our kiddos. Morgan, I'm going to come to you next. What are some barriers that might keep a family from accessing services? So this is a follow-up on some of the things that Steve already touched on.
Oh, of course. So for this one, I'm going to share like my professional and personal experience on this one. So professionally, being within a school, it's very hard. It's very hard in terms of making sure that parents usually don't know like how to access it. Like if I were to sit there and say, there's something wrong, there's something up, I notice something's going on with my child, and it's like, I don't know what to do next. I don't know what the next steps are. And there's a lot of barriers in the system. So working at the school, sometimes kids aren't getting identified, or they're not getting the correct level of support. So there's like a difference between like a guidance counselor or school counselor, and then like a mental health professional and a therapist. There is a difference between the two. And a lot of parents don't know that. So then their children will be seeing the counselor and not realizing that technically it's really outside that counselor's scope and role, unless they have the proper training, but most don't. It's really outside their scope and role. So if your child is having suicidal thoughts, or is self-harming, or is sad consistently and persistently, they should be seeing a therapist, not just the counselor. And that tended to be a big issue I have while working in school, where I would find out children who were self-harming, who were suicidal, other high-risk behaviors. They're seeing the school counselor every week for 6-7 months, and they're not being referred over to myself as the therapist on campus. And then having discussions with parents that they're just different roles. Like a school counselor is more normative. If there's a little, like, say there's some conflict happening, and, you know, within normal ranges, and being able to help resolve that conflict, and then the kid's fine afterwards, that makes sense. You don't need a therapist for that. But if your kid's constantly in fights and then isolating themselves and really having trouble with social connections, that's a more persistent, a little bit more of an intense problem. And at that point, they should be referred over. And most parents don't know that. Like, they feel like, a lot of parents tell me, oh, well, they've been seeing the counselor. I'm like, it's different. So not really having that knowledge. And it is complicated navigating the school system. It's really complicated, and there's a lot of really kind of sad stories I have in terms of children needing help and trying to navigate the system, and they're being pushed back, and there being power struggles, and it being pushed all the way up to the school board. You know, I was at one point told that I wasn't allowed to see someone who had self-harming behavior, and they told me I was supposed to turn that person away. And I was like, you're telling me as a mental health professional to turn away someone that's self-harming and telling me about suicidal thoughts? So there's those types of barriers that's happening within the system itself. And then I think of, which I think Steve touched upon it a little bit too, like the insurance and access part. So like me at us, we're contracted with Medi-Cal. So that means I am supposed to see Medi-Cal students only. So if I find a kid and I identify a need, say they have Kaiser or Blue Cross or Blue Shield, I'm not able to see them on a permanent basis. I can see them for a crisis basis, maybe in a group setting, but I can't see them as ongoing therapy. So then it's like reflecting it back to the school and the team at the school about making sure we get this kid connected. And that tends to be very tough. And there was one child where there was little follow through with the school, and I ended up having to call around, getting the referral, calling dad, telling dad about the referral and the appointment. And that's really outside my normal scope. Like that's not an expectation for me, but I went ahead and did it anyways, because the self-harming and suicidal thought in this child obviously needed support and help, but that's not always the case. And I also think of personally, when my child was experiencing some mental health issues and having to go through the process of being able to get them to see a provider. So I had to go to my PCP or my primary care physician. They had to assess my child. then make the referral, send it to insurance. Insurance had to approve it, tell me what providers they can have, and then I had to schedule the appointment. So this was like a 1.5-month process to get my own child into services after I identified, like, I'm concerned. If like there's a lot going on, I'm concerned. It was like about 1.5 months. And like what Steve was saying, there's all the other barriers of like getting them to services. And so there is a lot, and it is difficult. And I'm hoping that with the people that are trying to push and advocate to like lessen those barriers for people and that are doing really good work in the field will continue to do it. I think Renee had a
Yeah, I thank you for sharing your personal experience as well, because I think hopefully it's normalizing for others here on the call who are hearing about a mental health professional having their own challenges getting services. I echo those same experiences. I'm trying to access services even for myself at times in my life. And I think about the degree of advocacy that parents have to do sometimes before their child is able to get services, and the ways in which that impacts the family. The family is under immense stress during that period, and the parent or caregiver themselves could be experiencing really complex and negative emotions as they're trying to do right by their kiddo, but they're also having a hard time finding those connections that work both logistically and also that are a fit for what the child is going through. And Renee, this is where I come to you. How could the parents and caregivers get support for themselves through all this? I never want parents to feel like their only role is to care for the young people in their home, but I want them to also know that it's important for them to be well themselves in order to be able to do this job.
So you know that I'm going to be a little biased over here because I was the manager of, the parent support helpline. Okay.
I want you to plug it.
1-800. Okay. Anyway, but but all kidding aside, this is one of the best ways that parents can get support. There are different helplines out there. We happen to be the one for Alameda County. We happen to be around for the past 48 years or so. We're open 24 hours a day. Am I plugging it enough over here? We're open 24 hours a day, and we can help anyone in any language that is spoken in Alameda County because we use a translator line, and bam, we're right there for anyone who has any questions about that. Now, if we're going to be, if the person who needs the support is outside of Alameda County, there are helplines also in San Francisco. I believe it's called a Talk Line in San Francisco. I know that there is something in Santa Clara County, but I can't recall the name. But if worse came to worse, there is a national suicide helpline in which it's not only for the client that needs the support, but that can also be called in by the parents that need to have a forum, of people whom to speak to. Okay, so the services are out there. The trick is picking up the phone and actually requesting them. Yeah.
Thank you. And as you mentioned, the Lifeline, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, I do want to mention that Crisis Support Services is a member of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So if you call and you are Alameda County resident, you'll come here to us in Oakland. I'm sitting in my office right now. We've been open through all of COVID and whatever else life throws at us. We're here and we're ready to listen. And I really appreciate the sentiment that you don't have to be in crisis before you ask for help. That's something that I find happening quite a bit, is people waiting till it feels like I'm gonna break if this goes on one more minute. And we want you to ask for help when you're just stressed out. And that way you and anyone in your life can continue and have capacity to be a caregiver, because our own capacities really play a huge role in our ability to be there for other people. And I say that as someone who's a professional helper. Me having capacity to be there for other people is impacted by what's happening in my life. So all of us could use support. And the next question is for Steve. How can parents and caregivers start this conversation in their home?
I love this question because it's the core of what Z Cares is all about. It's one of our taglines is, let's talk about it. And we firmly believe that conversation is such a healthy element, but it needs to be held at the right level. So I think we need to get beyond the "How are you? I'm fine" exchange, and get it deeper. Like, how are you really, right? And getting deep into what's really going on, and I think there's steps to take to get to that level of conversation, because it's, again, you go back to typical adolescent behavior, right? A conversation at home can be uncomfortable, or, there's things that kind of go with that. We had and this is why I love what we do at ZCARES. We get a chance to talk to some of these youth, and they become very open in conversation. And one of the things they said I thought was very insightful, which was, the question was, what do you want your parents to know? And the answer was, this was from a high school junior that replied to this. The answer was, I want them to know that I really need them in my life. I need everything they say, and I know I don't show that. Right. So I think that's a really insightful thing, that they really are listening to what's being said, even though that's not necessarily shown. So I think, as adults, there's things that we can do, right? How do we approach the youth at their level, right? So how, instead of just jumping right into a uncomfortable conversation, how do you come in at their level, whether it's, at a favorite restaurant, or just a favorite meal, or, just something to break through the ice of what's going on. So how do you get that approach? And then some of it goes back to things we've all learned, and whether it's professional training, or even going back to high school, college, whatever, where we talk about, listening and non-listening skills. It's really important, right? And it's one thing that I've had to train myself in is stop listening to answer, right? And listen to listen. And that's, for me, that became a really important thing that I've worked super hard at, as opposed to, okay, I got my answer ready. By the time I'm doing that, I'm no longer listening anymore, right? Listen to everything that they have to say. Really important. And all of those skills, right? Don't be on your phone while you're listening. All the things that we know from a nonverbal perspective are really true. And a lot of the areas that, providing facts, right? So if we know that they're struggling, they've shared that they're struggling, we can provide facts and hope, but without being unrealistic. We don't want to say things like, oh, you'll be better tomorrow. That's likely not to be the case, right? So it is a process to get into healing and hope, but providing hope that there is hope for getting through this, those types of things. And just like the kids sharing that they want their parents in their lives, I think it's important for us as parents to let them know that we're there for them, right? At a deep level. And with that, it's like modeling our own vulnerability. I can say, my daughter and I have had a lot of deeper conversations over the last couple of years that have resulted in a lot of tears from both of us. And I'm perfectly okay with that. Right. And I think they're healthier conversations than again, that superficial level. We have developed a home discussion guide, and I'm happy to share it. It's on our website, but if you can't find it, let me know. The website's over in the chat, and we're happy to share that and get that over to you. And it's sometimes maybe it is easier, like, okay, let's just follow this instructions on having a conversation. It does, and it leads you to that vulnerable conversation level. And the last thing that I'll say is, we're not there to fix anything. We're there to listen. Right. And that was one of the feedback that we got heavily from the kids that we've talked to, is don't try to fix us, because I think it's important to know they're not broken. So that, that we're not fixing something that's not broken, but we're there to be there for them and help them through the challenges that they might be facing.
Yeah, thank you for those insights. And one of the ones that really speaks to me and I talk about often is like modeling that vulnerability that you mentioned, and also modeling not being okay. I think so often when I used to work in a school setting, there was a misconception from the young people that their parents had it together. And parents work really hard to create that facade that we always have it together. But I think acknowledging that it's actually in service of our children for us to say, I had a really bad day and I need to go on a walk. I had a fight with a friend of mine and I need to call someone to talk about it. So we're modeling, we can have crap days and we can seek help. And that can really set the tone for them not being as afraid to come forward when they might not be able to handle something, because they've seen us do this over and over again. So I really appreciate you naming modeling as such an important way that we can be there for our young people. And it made me also think about, so often parents tell me, well, I started the conversation and they didn't tell me anything. And really naming that it's not one conversation. And that just because on the first time nothing comes of it, please don't be discouraged and don't think of it as a moot topic in our homes. We really need to be bringing this up over time. With that, I want to shift back to the school system. And Morgan, what are some ways parents and caregivers can be partnering with school systems if they are worried about their child? And with that, I want to also tell our audience that you can begin putting your questions for our panel in the chat. After this question, I will be taking questions to the panel. I have some prepared as well, but I invite you to ask your questions as well. Go ahead, Morgan.
Awesome. Okay, so once again, I'm going to do my professional and parent. So professionally, a lot of parents aren't aware there's this thing called COST, C-O-S-T. And most of the school districts in the East Bay area has a COST program. And what it is, it's a referral process. And not a lot of people are aware of this process. I even find people that are working within the school don't know about the process and don't know how to do the process. So it's very, very important to do a COST referral. And essentially what it does is it puts your child on the radar. You put down your concerns, whether it's social, emotional, maybe it's, maybe there's concerns with stuff going on in the home, there's changes in their behaviors, they're not doing so good in school when they were used to be a good student. You get to mark down all the things you're concerned about. And what happens is a team of professionals come together. So there is the administrative, the school counselors, therapists, there's the school psychologists, sometimes resource officers. It's a whole bunch of individuals that come together, discuss what they know about the child, and then determine what supports that the school can provide for the children. And that's actually the #1 way we get referrals. So that's mainly where all my referrals come from, is through the COST process. And the other great thing about the COST process is it provides a written record that you showed that you were concerned and that it holds the school accountable. Because on the bottom of the COST, it tells you have to write down we have to write down what we did, what our recommendation was, what are the steps we're doing, and we have to let whoever referred know this is what we're doing to address the problem. And so that would be a huge thing in terms of working with the school, because I will say that most people do not know about that process. I would also say talking to the school about common concerns that lead to mental health, people having trouble with mental health. So number one I hear is bullying. Like almost every single one of my students who report suicidal thoughts also experience bullying. And this feeling the school's not doing anything about it and feeling like it can't get better. And so that brings me to my personal experience of when I had to work with my school and advocate for my own child. He was experiencing bullying really, really bad. He had a small group of children.
Morgan, we lost your audio. I think I might not be the only one who.
Yeah, it looks like she froze.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll allow her to sign back on. We're flexible here. I'll go to Renee with a question that had come up in the chat earlier, which was around parents who are not English speaking. I know you mentioned the availability of interpreters and things like that on your line. Are there other barriers that you have seen families experience when they have immigrated to this country or when English is not one of the primary languages spoken? How do you see that play a role in families' ability to connect to resources and get help for the young people?
Oh my God, where to start? Okay. Yes, I think that in and of itself, well, there are a couple of things that come to mind. One of them is in and of itself, just being from a different culture. the thought of seeking resources can sometimes be seen as a sign of weakness, can be seen as a sign of like, you know, I'm not crazy. I mean, even if it's not going to be for therapy, and if they were to go in that direction, it just doesn't feel comfortable for them. Second of all, I have experience with a lot of my Latino clients, a lot of fear about what that means to seek services that may be paid by the county. They don't understand the difference that is being paid by different kinds of governments. So they don't want to seek those resources for fear of what kind of repercussions they may have to take on later on. So those two things will be, those come right up immediately. I'm also kind of like thinking of families in which there has already been a stigma of mental health, and they want to dismiss that there may be something else happening right now, because if it's not named, that it's not happening. Okay, so they rather keep it quiet instead of like moving, asking for it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I really hear like the role of stigma and also the role of fear and the lack of information about what it means to use different services.
Yes.
All really becoming like additional barriers on top of everything else we've named for families who might have immigrated to this country or who might not speak English as their primary language.
You know, and I just thought of one more thing. There is also a matter of pride. I have worked with so many families that they're very prideful that, you know, we're here and we are not asking anyone for help or support, and we're not going to do it. Okay. So it's like, how do you convince someone of that? Is very tough. It's doable, but it's pretty tough.
Yeah, and I really hear that, and I'll disclose that as an immigrant myself, I remember being in high school and not wanting to burden my parents with the challenges that I was having because they had done so much to bring us here. And so I think the barriers from the parents' perspective are very real. And I think there is these additional barriers on the children's end too, where they feel like they might not want to add another layer of distress for their families who have worked so hard to bring the family to the U.S. With hopes of having a better life. So I really hear that sense of pride and those barriers in your narrative. Thanks, Renee. Morgan, we're happy that you're back. We will kind of throw a little side question at you as people have been discussing on the chat. There's a worry that being identified as a referral in a cost meeting could kind of follow a child around in their educational career or become kind of a negative mark on their file, or however you want to see it. This is a question I've seen come up before. Is there an answer you have for parents who might be worried about the formal process of identifying their kiddos as someone who's having a hard time emotionally? You're on mute.
I apologize. My internet went out, so I'm on my phone now.
We hear you.
You gotta love working from home and rolling blackouts. It's amazing. So mainly the students who are identified for cost are usually already on the radar, and the alternative is usually punitive. It's usually trying to replace punitive actions. Usually the students who tend to have the behaviors that are concerning are acting out behaviors and things that are already sending them to the principal's office. There's also the idea that it's usually you're having trouble academically. So you're already usually on the radar, and it's a lot of times the system not recognizing that that means more. It's not something to do with the teachers or the staff. It usually means something more. So whenever I see children, I get a lot of children where teachers come to me and they're like, oh, this kid, they're such a bad kid, and they're such this, and they're such that. And then I'm having to reframe it in a trauma-informed. Like, they're not doing this to you. They're not doing this to make you mad. They're in pain, and they're hurting, and they need help. And so, in all honesty, usually cost isn't seen as a negative thing. Like, this is something the school really wants because this is helping them. It isn't anything in terms of like punitive or punishment. It's all about giving them the supports and accessing the supports that are already there at the school. And this gets you on that process. And honestly, it's going to the AP. It is going for legal, because if your kid's missing school because they're depressed, then they might have to go down a legal avenue because they're missing school. We would rather get them identified at cost and fix it, like to address it before it gets to that point. So we don't see it as punitive in the school or negative. It's different.
Thanks, Morgan. Steve, I want to come back to you and bring up something that was in the chat earlier, which is really the relationships between young people and their parents. And I'm wondering if you ever hear from young people whose parents have also experienced mental health challenges themselves, and how that might impact the dynamic between the two.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes, and honestly, it's even in my own home, right? I mean, I go through my own levels of depression and anxiety based on everything that happened with our son, and it kind of goes back to the whole area of modeling vulnerability, that type of thing, and being open and honest about how we're feeling. Whether it's the parent feeling or the child feeling of trying to build that level of trust that we can have these deeper conversations. That's what I meant when I said going beyond the "How are you?" "Oh, I'm fine," because that's just a trained answer that we throw out there. But we in our home we try to model that today's not a good day. I'm really thinking of Zachary a lot today, and it's it's bringing me down, and we talk about it, and we've heard the same from other families that a lot of times it's those same, going back to barriers. The parents feel some of those same barriers of, oh, I don't want to become a burden for my children, so I'm going to hold it back. But honestly, what we're learning is the kids do want to know. They want to know if we're not feeling well, we're not feeling right, and they want us to share, right? So by us sharing, it becomes a two-way street. And I think that's what we're hearing and what we're seeing. We know it's a struggle, and as parents, we want to be a rock for our kids. And we don't want to be the thing that maybe brings them down. But it's honestly, I think it has brought our family closer to have deeper conversations. So yeah, that's kind of how we look at it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I really appreciate your openness and vulnerability with us, talking about your own mental health challenges over the years, because I think so many parents do experience that, and being open about it is really powerful. Renee, I'm going to come to you next about something that Morgan had spoken about earlier, which was self-harm. And she had mentioned self-harm in the context of something that might be a warning sign or might be coming up at school, or parents might be worried about. I get a lot of questions around kind of from parents about how to make sense of self-harm or how to address that. And I know today we're talking about suicide prevention, but I think this feels like an important clarification to help people make. Could you speak a little about how you would talk to a parent who's worried about their child intentionally harming themselves?
So one of the things that I talk to them about is your child being seen, or does your child feel like he or she is being seen? Okay. A lot of times the actions that they do take are geared in that direction. I mean, a lot of times kids are looking for ways to be seen, and parents are like not really catching on to what may be happening. I mean, and we already talked a little bit about that with some, throwing tantrums, or not doing well in school, or like neglecting friends, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it comes to the point that, and this is unconscious, this is not something that the kids are thinking in a corner, how am I going to get my parents' attention? So they may start upping their behaviors to the point that, self-harm is one of them. Oh, I'm going to be seen this way. And of course, when parents do find out that that's happening, more often than not, there is going to be a response, a quick response. So guess what? Boom, all of a sudden they are being seen. Another reason why kids do self-harm is because they want to feel something that they may not be experiencing at a given time. And that is a little bit more abstract to talk about, and that would take, probably another whole hour at least to talk about it. But a lot of times when kids self-harm, that brings them to a different emotional, feeling-wise dimension that they are not getting otherwise. And it's almost like, this is my body. I'm going to control my body. I'm going to do whatever I want with my body. And the harming part almost becomes less for them than the I have control part. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I really like the wording of being seen. At times you hear people say things like attention seeking when they're talking about self-harm behaviors, but I think I usually steer people away from that, and this idea of being seen is a lot more neutral and I think accurate way of describing how our children might be trying to get us to see their pain in a particular moment or the challenges that they're going through. We have 4 minutes left. I want to give folks a chance. If there's any final thoughts, any of our panelists want to share any thoughts you want to leave the group with, we do appreciate everyone being with us today. I'm going to drop a link in the chat of all the links I had dropped earlier about crisis support services. But Renee, Morgan, and Steve, any parting thoughts for our group today?
Yeah, I mean, from me, it goes back to talk about it. I think that's a super healthy approach, whether that's talking to a professional, talking to a friend, talking to someone that you may be connected to. Just, encourage our youth to talk about it, and as adults talk about it. It's it's a conversation we shouldn't be afraid of. Let's train ourselves to make that a part of everyday conversation.
Yeah, you really modeled that for us today, Steve, and I appreciate you for that.
Thank you.
Renee, I see your hand up.
So I'd like to second what Steve said. I mean, I think that's fantastic, Steve. Everything that you just, like the way that you put it out there. I'd like to also throw in the word curiosity. It's like, it's all about what's happening over here. And let's not try to go in with an agenda to make sense of things, but really curiosity to find out. And I'm going to, again, plug in Family Pats, 1-800-829-3777. Give us a call.
Thank you so much, Renee. Morgan?
I kind of feel like I'm going to be echoing both of them. It's the idea of talking, definitely and then like managing your own thoughts and feelings around it, because they're like, a lot of times we have our own stigma and our own feelings about having that conversation, and kids sense that. Kids completely sense it. So if you're uncomfortable in that moment and you're presenting as being uncomfortable, then the kids are going to sense it, and then it's going to block that feeling. So a lot of times I do a lot of normalization. I apologize, my puppy. A lot of normalization. So like, sometimes when we're getting bullied, we start having these thoughts, and I'm wondering if that might be what's going on with you. So definitely that. And then, I'm so sorry. And then it kind of seems like my big thing was advocacy. Advocating for like what you need, talking to school, telling them we need support, getting the support you need, like talking to the community and linking it to that. So once again, I apologize. The joys of being at home. My little puppy is very upset right now.
Thank you. I want to thank all three of our panelists today for their knowledge, for their personal experiences. You've really enriched this conversation, and we appreciate you for that, and leaving us with the thoughts to be curious, start the conversation, and really model an advocate. That I really want to leave us with that. And there's a lot of thank yous in the chat. So thanks everyone. I'll stick around for a couple minutes in case anything comes up in the chat or anyone wants to speak up. But this is the end of our panel discussion, and I will stop the recording. Thanks everyone. Have a good rest of your day.